Hi, and welcome to the X22 Report. My name is Dave, and today's guest I have Ginny, and she has worked with the DOE. And Ginny, can you just tell us a little bit about your background?
Okay, well, I have spent many years before I was a designer of training, and I designed training for emergency operations for the Department of Energy. And as a result of a split off of two organizations, I actually directly worked for the National Nuclear Security Administration. That's the NNSA. And I did that for several years. Prior to that, I worked with large manufacturing systems of high-tech components. And I've also worked with electromagnetic compatibility as an R&D technician, an advanced R&D technician. I worked with electromagnetic compatibility for non-invasive medical monitors.
Okay. Now, today, I talk a lot about cyber attacks, the power going out, and the interruption of the power grid, the water supply. Now, you have more information on power going out, EMP pulses, and, what information do you have that expands on what I've been saying?
Well, I watch X22 Report all the time. I keep up with it because I find you're got a really good comprehensive grasp of a lot of things that are going on. And this particular thing made me get in contact because a lot of people think that when the power goes out, it's just a big party, and it's an excuse to, not go to work and, just have, a grand old time and light a couple candles and roast some marshmallows. And that's fine if it's not wintertime, number one. But the other thing that happens is people need to get serious about this, particularly if they're living in densely populated areas of the country. Your survival is on a thin, nice edge when the power goes down. A lot of people don't realize that backup generators for hospitals or elevators or cell phones or the regular telecommunications system, which is data included, they don't have the fuel or the capacity to last more than about a day. And that's the entire telecommunications system, for instance. It's got 1 day's worth of emergency backup power. And once that goes away, one of the big problems they've had is they don't want to store large quantities of fuel because we've had terrorist threats, and at any time you have a large bunch of fuel stored somewhere, then that could be a target. So when you start talking about cyber threat, I started thinking about the Stuxnet virus and what it did to the Iranian reactors, actually not to their reactors, but to their centrifuges. And what is involved with the Stuxnet virus, don't think that whoever put that virus out was playing a joke. Actually, I'm not sure if some people got killed, but there was certainly a potential for that to happen. And it might have looked like a joke, and it might have been funny that the centrifuges started running really fast. But centrifuges that are running way too fast are kind of a good sign to us of what happens when things go wrong with SCADA. And SCADA is the control system that the Stuxnet virus was infecting. SCADA is everywhere throughout our country. And I sent you a report, Dave, on called the President's Commission on the Threat of EMP. And one of the things those folks really centered on was what happens when, for one reason or another, solar flare, a bomb going off overhead. By the way, an atomic bomb going off 300 miles overhead probably wouldn't even be noticed by a lot of people. A 10-kiloton nuclear bomb going off in the atmosphere 300 miles up might look like a meteor, or it would not kill anybody with radiation, and the explosion wouldn't really hurt anybody, probably, most likely, especially a small one. And but the resulting electromagnetic pulse can fry transistors. And that means most of our entire world right now is dependent on transistors, and that would be sensors, cell phones, control systems, you name it, And so the problem with that, okay, a solar flare, an atomic bomb going off, or an enemy attack with an EMP bomb are all things that the government looks at as potential terror threats. And those things are very unlikely. But a power outage is really very likely. And I'd like to wake people up from their euphoria of thinking that a power outage is just a party. Because there are some impacts that are going to follow on that are very, very serious. And I'd like to get into some of those details.
Okay. So before we do that, let me just ask you a question. If a nuclear bomb was exploded over, let's say, the Northeast, like New York area, do you know how many miles out it would fry the equipment? I mean, is it a set area, or would it affect the entire country, or just a certain square miles of that area that it flew up over?
Well, that's basically, there is a lot of documentation out there on EMP, and the scenario that I have most commonly read is if they set, and I'll tell you, I thought this was a real possibility when the Soviet fleet was down in the Gulf of Mexico on their way to visit Chavez in Venezuela. Right. Because all it would take would be something like a Scud missile and a 10-kiloton nuke, which is what that's really small. And I think about 90 countries in this world have 10-kiloton nukes. And if it were launched and it detonated 300 miles over Kansas City, from coast to coast, we would experience equipment failures. That's 3,000 miles. And there is a difference because of the Earth's magnetic field. It does cause, there's actually over Minnesota, people might not even know anything happened. But equipment failures and out, nobody's physically going to get damaged from it, except for the people that are in cars that suddenly stop and they're going 70 miles an hour. And things like that, they're going to be, I guess you'd call it collateral damage.
Right.
So you just take that epicenter and move it over New York. So you're looking at good parts of Newfoundland, Canada, all the way probably out to the Tennessee Valley.
Wow. So,
and, that means everything that's current-driven fails. And all transistors are current-driven.
Right. So, let me just take this a step further. We just talked about EMP. For someone to turn the power off, either by cyber attack, and we talked about EMP, how hard would that be to bring down the power, or using, so I talk about cyber attacks. I mean, from your experience and your knowledge, is it that difficult to shut everything down?
Well, that's a complex answer.
Okay.
And it's a really important question. And right now I'm paging through that document that I sent you on the President's Commission on EMP. And before we even get on to that, I'd like to make it clear that when the power grid comes down, it doesn't go down nicely. Okay, it doesn't go down in one clean blip. It'll go down in lumps and bumps. And there are 8 grids in this country that are interconnected. And most people have seen that YouTube video, or a lot of people have seen the YouTube video where hackers took an old, I think they had it on CNN
right.
originally, it's an old DOE generator, and messed around with the synchronization rate. And were able to internally blow up. Basically, they set the synchronization off so badly, they messed the timing up on that generator so badly that it self-destructed internally. But that was a really old generator, and there are weaknesses in the infrastructure that in '98 it was mandated that, which is the National Energy Resources Council, that they would start hardening facilities and start thinking about the entire grid system in terms of hardening it to being able to come down. And unfortunately, there's a lot of private companies and governmental agencies that are kind of rubbing against each other. You know, there's the profit end, and this is spending lots and lots of money for something that may or may not happen. And I think people have trouble taking that seriously. And so hasn't been a lot of progress. But there are 8 interconnected grids, and they're really divided up into 3 big, I guess I'd call them big agglomerations of smaller grids. There's the eastern half of the country and the western half of the country, and then ERCOT, which is Texas. Texas has got its own power grid. And if you remember Enron was in the business of kind of trading energy, wherever somebody was having let's say part of the country was having a heat wave and they were getting brownouts, and part of the country was not having the heat wave. Well, Enron was in the business of shunting power from areas that had us to areas that needed more. So those grids are interconnected, and that's what they mean by cascading failure. Those interconnection points are the weaknesses.
Now,
and those are ways that you get that ripple effect.
Let me ask you, you said the power grid will not go down cleanly. It'll go down, in bumps and blips. And what do you mean by that? Like, if somebody is at home, what would they expect to see, or what would happen?
Well, sometimes when the power grid goes down, particularly in areas that have large consumption, like big cities, if you've ever looked at the amount of power that goes into the L, I don't know if New York still has it elevated, but in Philadelphia we did, and that L comes above ground. It goes through the subway down through Center City, and then on the east of it comes up above. And then there's a bunch of subway surface cars, too, that we had in Philly. And the amount of power that runs those devices it's just astounding. On rainy days, you see the arcing from those wands that the subway surface cars use. And that is potentially lethal voltage. It's probably 100,000 volts. And the thing about electrical systems is that whenever you have a bunch of wires, they're kind of like a sponge in that they can soak up a lot of power to get them running, and then once the running stops, they push back a lot of power. So it would be equivalent to doing a belly flop into a swimming pool. You land on the surface and push away a lot of water, and that water hits the edges, and then it slaps back, and you get a big collision in the middle of the pool when all the water comes back and they hit each other. Well, that's exactly what happens in the power system. So you might have a 3-bump power outage. The first is cut off, but then all that draw that is still in place, all the elevators, all the subways, all the everything that's going on. The companies manufacturing, all the lighting in New York, it's all still trying to draw that power. So it just basically, if there's no more supply, it just completely sucks it dry. But then there are line reflections, and things start to fail and burn out, and they could short, and they could send back a whole bunch of power. So there might be a sudden turn off and then a turn on, and then lights might actually, especially light bulbs might blow up. And then I've actually been in a power outage where motors started running backwards. Because when it came on, it went probably 20 seconds, but the phases were reversed, and that really wreaked havoc with the company where this happened. All the pumps started running backwards, and as a result, we had massive overflows and chemical contamination in this manufacturing process. And some of those chemicals are not designed to be combined. So that's why I'm talking to you, because people need to get ready for this. It's not a question of if. It's a question of when. And when it happens, it's not going to be pretty.
And what do you mean by that? It's not going to be pretty. Like what?
What would your reaction be if you had a responder in full hazmat gear, complete with self-contained breathing apparatus, knocking on your door, telling you had to evacuate? How would you feel about that?
Not very good. I ask a lot of questions of what's going on, why do we have to leave? And,
you better hope that guy has a gas mask for you and your family.
Well, yeah, and why is he dressed like that and we are not?
There you go. That's the thing. The CDC has a very good section on its website on how to shelter in place. Because, okay, I said the telecommunications system only has about a day of backup power. But certain things are going to fry. Once this lumpy bump happens, any SCADA system that is near something large that has windings, like a turbine or a large pump or a generator, these SCADA systems are not in cabinets that are protected from the electrical fields. And it's equivalent to being struck by lightning. That's what the President's Commission report on EMP goes into. They go into detail on what happens to the SCADA systems once an EMP hits. And in the case of a power outage, this is what got me, is what made me contact you, is
Right.
that the resulting electromagnetic surges from just our normal infrastructure are probably going to take out several SCADA systems because they are not hardened against the interference. And there are two ways for something to fail. It either fails and stops working, in which case a lot of companies and utilities have fail-safes. So if something fails, they'll just take it offline and they have a redundant system to plug in, and everything's good until they run out of fuel. But then there's the walking wounded type failure, and that's when the SCADA system is damaged in some way. Maybe the sensors are damaged, or the SCADA logic, which is very, very likely. The SCADA logic gets damaged, and it starts misinterpreting the signals. And, when the nuclear plant's cooling water is dangerously low, if the sensors are damaged and saying that the pumps are running full and there's plenty of water, it's not going to shove any more water in there because they don't want an overflow. And that's if the sensors are giving false information, then the system is programmed to make bad decisions. So there's a very good likelihood that nuclear plants on the Hudson could possibly go critical. Chemical plants, processing plants are very likely to have overflows and spills, or combinations of chemicals in pipelines that were never designed to handle those combinations. I once saw a 10-foot, 18-inch pipe matrix. It was a bunch of valves and chambers and washout tanks, and this thing was a manifold that had an inch supplying all these different chemical baths, and a sensor failed, and it sent down sodium hypochlorite into hydrogen peroxide. And that we were picking shards of plastic up from 200 feet away, shards of PVC, and the roof of that facility was 40 feet high, and large sections of that pipe matrix were embedded in the roof.
Wow. And
so that's why I'm saying that one of the first orders of the day, if you're a prepared city dweller, spend the money and get a gas mask. Because CDC has this good website on how to shelter in place. And keep in mind that if these failures ripple through, there's going to be a horrible traffic jam. And responders are not going to be able to assemble and get to their places and get on it as quickly as the exercises. One of the things that exercises traditionally seem to ignore is that for 40 miles around wherever this exercise or drill is taking place, they should have instituted a huge traffic jam, total gridlock, and see how long those responders stay in place.
Right.
So we're looking at radiation, possible hazardous chemical combinations. We're looking at barge collisions. We're looking at problems with freight containers. It's an endless litany of things that could go wrong, and the best thing people can do is protect their basic needs and really get serious about this. If you live up on a 40th floor of some place, how are you going to get down? And what's wrong with having a bicycle? If you're fit enough to get on a bike, you should have a bicycle because nobody's going to get anywhere in the cars. They're all just going to be gridlocked.
So just with the power going out is not the only problem. You're talking about could be hazardous chemicals in the air. It could be
Right.
nuclear problems. The barges at sea and other electrical devices could be maybe exploding during this time.
Well, keep in mind that New York City particularly has a very old infrastructure. And I think that's one of the reasons they do so many exercises and drills there. A lot of the tunnels that house the electrical conduits and the telecommunication systems are constantly maintained by pumps because New York has a very high water table. And if those pumps run out of fuel, then those systems go down, period.
So then, you were telling me when we were talking before about, about power outages. People think it's a party, and I was in one back in 2003, where people in the beginning they everything's fine, they're partying, it's dark out, and you were telling me that beyond that, and it's not a party anymore. And just go a little bit into what you were telling me before about what to expect after like 1 or 2 or 3 days.
Okay, well, there are going to be different conditions in different parts of every place. In some places, water mains are going to be broken, and there will very likely be no water. Water pressure relies on pumping. It's not a natural thing. We may have an old aqueduct system somewhere, but that water pressure is distributed throughout large population areas by pumps. And the other problem is going to be raw sewage. That's one thing that we always don't like to think about, but sewage plants run on SCADA, and raw sewage is going to back up. There's no question about it. So after day 3, people are going to get a little tired of this. They're going to sleep it off, and they're going to get tired of walking up 15 floors. And the floors will be completely cleaned out. There won't be any food, and there won't be much drinking water around. And the air may be impossible to breathe if you go outside. So, and the responders are going to come if they can get there. And there could be plenty of reasons why they can't get there. So looting will start. Get Katrina and see some of the social effects that will happen. But, they're saying that, I love this when they say 8 to 10 months to get the power grid back. That's not what they say at DOE.
Oh, what's the time frame in the DOE? What is their time frame?
8 to 10 years.
8 to 10 years?
Yeah, because you can't just go buy a major transformer. They have to make them, and they custom make them. And the lead time, and we'll see if you read that EMP report, the president's, and it's a huge report, it's about 200 pages, but it takes 1 to 3 years to get a hold of some of the replacement equipment. And they're so prohibitively expensive, they don't always have backups. They don't always have a second one in the wings waiting. And even if they did, they weigh 40 tons. And they've got to figure out how to hook everything up and initiate power flow. And even bringing things back online can actually be just as catastrophic as taking things offline. Because they have to look at the entire system to see whether or not it's going to be able to handle the load.
So this this is more catastrophic than what they're even talking, because in the news and everything they talked about, they're talking about, 2-3 months, and you've seen longer, sometimes someone said, 2 years, but you're saying it's much, much longer than that. And
yes, I'm saying that most preparations that needed to be made have not been made. They're not complete.
So let me ask you, why all of a sudden are all these reports coming out about the power grid? I mean, I report on it that the power grid is, and not just I mean, from the DHS, Department of Homeland Security, and from the Pentagon, they're all talking about the infrastructure power grid. Then we have reports on EMP. Why are all these reports all of a sudden coming out at this time?
I have a feeling that some of the reason it's related in some way, it could be related to this fallacious business of closing all those embassies. How would you feel if you were an Iranian scientist and your centrifuge lab had just been destroyed by a virus that was planted by opposing political systems, shall we say?
Right.
People don't get mad; they get even. And there are many vicious viruses that have been released, throughout the world. But the problem with the SCADA virus, number one, we're not used to that. We don't have good protection. We don't have good antivirus for SCADA systems. Nobody ever thought about that. But I don't know. I guess I'm connecting it somehow to those. They almost always give you some sort of preparation. And I'm sorry, but during 9/11, you've got to question why we could not stand up an air defense. It's because they were on a drill up in Canada. Right. Well, they weren't available. Excuse me, we're going to leave the entire East Coast not defended because we have a drill, an international drill we have to go participate in? That's just beyond the pale. And I guess I look at the 1993 World Trade Center bombing was foreshadowing. And there are certain... Well, it's hard for me to temper what I say, Dave, but, with what I know about how emergencies are used in this country, emergencies are used in recent years. The of an emergency has been all we need to manipulate people into giving up their constitutional rights. And if it's not going quickly enough for whoever has this agenda, then we need more fear. Because we've got to get some people to give up some rights somewhere. And I can't think of anything worse than a power failure, to get people to give up their rights and go where they're told and do what they're supposed to do. Because they're so dependent on, for everything normal in everyday life, we make so many assumptions, and those assumptions are about to be rattled. They're about to be questioned. And if we want to be prepared, we have to start questioning our own assumptions. You assume that elevator's going to come when you press the button, right?
Right.
Well, I would not.
So all these reports and everything that's coming out, I've been saying that this is a doomsday. If they can't get their way and they can't get what they want, I've been talking about a cyber attack to bring down everything as a doomsday type of scenario to really get everything they want and get the people going and get everything they need. Is this what you're saying also?
Well, yeah, and your main push, if I'm correct, your main push has been that this is all designed to get us into war with Syria, because it's really not Syria that is the target, that it's Iran that is the target.
Right. Iran.
And this fits in with what Wesley Clark had to say so many years ago. about the 7 targets that we have in the Middle East. Syria is number 6, and Iran is number 7.
Right.
I mean, it just all jives. But, you know, there have been several instances where what I'm talking about have been unintentional, and they still cause loss of life and huge quantities of money. One of the nice things about this EMP report is it talks about things like SCADA systems going down because of a lightning storm. And I guess because I was in emergency operations training for so long, I think about what happens when people get evacuated, because I know of incidents that have occurred during drills. Well, actually, one wasn't a drill, and it wasn't that far from the Northeast, where I have to be careful about how I say this. There was a really, really, really bad storm.
Right.
And this is an example that is not electronic or electrical, but it was an electrical storm, and it was really, really frightening. And it happened that the rain was just coming down in sheets, and a flood came down a hill and went into underneath the warehouse door. It actually ripped out the warehouse door. And this happened at one of our national laboratories. And basically the water came pouring down this hill, and they had never, ever had a flood come down this hill before. But it ripped out the warehouse doors, and it knocked over a bunch of gas cylinders, nitrogen and oxygen and welding gases and stuff like that. And meanwhile, the offices had been evacuated because of the fear of flood and because they had a power outage due to all the lightning, and they had managed, before all the lightning started, they got all these people into the other side of that warehouse. And what happened when those cylinders fell over was that they became rockets, and they were literally pounding down the cinder block wall that was between the 2 warehouses. And so these gas cylinders were literally pulverizing the wall between the people and this incredible disaster that was occurring. And so I am very conscious about not evacuating people into a plume. And in the heat of stress and injury and fear, responders they're doing the best they can, and they're doing what they're told, but they're not going to have adequate information when this happens. They're not going to be able to get updates. And they're going to be doing the best they can with very little in the way of resources, and that includes communication. So I'm thinking that all this stuff, that was kind of a very indirect answer, but I'm thinking that, number one, we seem to get warnings, don't we? When right before things happen, we get warnings.
Yes, we do.
And it's up to us to decide whether or not it's hooey or whether or not we're going to take it seriously. And, in your career, I mean, do something. And what are the simple, cheap things you can do? You get some jugs of water and set them aside somewhere out of the way. Get some ramen noodles. They keep forever. Mice don't like them. Just get some food and be ready to get some duct tape. Be ready to shelter in place. Understand what sheltering in place means. Because if the whole city's in a traffic jam and looting is happening, you got thugs running around out there, with guns, and raw sewage is flowing, and chemical plants are overflowing, and the nukes are going critical, are you going to step outside of your door? You probably would want to wait for some of it to blow over. But you can't if you're not prepared.
Right.
And if fire, what better time to put on your gas mask so you can make it? Everybody should have a gas mask. Right now I live in an RV, and I don't travel anywhere in this RV without arms. I have a few arms, and without my gas mask. And it's an Israeli gas mask, and I have extra canisters for it.
Okay.
And I'll tell you, I just came back I went to New Jersey from New Mexico, and On my way, there was an oil spill in Arkansas, and I-40 was closed because they had 22,000 gallons of really caustic crude going through a neighborhood. It was a beautiful suburban neighborhood, and I-25 was closed, and there were irritating fumes for 10 square miles. I mean, people really, really get it from it. And that was this old, I don't know if you heard about that pipeline.
No.
This Ginny.
No, I didn't.
Exxon, old, 60 years old, and it blew a gasket because it was never designed to carry crude. So that's why I'm talking to you, Dave, because, people think it's a party until day 3, and then they go, my toilet's clogged up, or, there's no water coming out of my tap.
Right.
And all the stores are empty, there's no food, and now people are starting to loot and rob, and, cars are just abandoned in the middle of an intense gridlock where people just have to get out of their cars and leave. How long can you stay in the car and hoping that your traffic jam is going to be resolved?
Yeah, I never thought about the traffic jam and people trying to scramble and get away, and it'd be very hard to move and to get around at that point. And I didn't think about chemicals and all the other things that you discussed. I wasn't really my mindset wasn't in that way, in thinking of that. But that's very good points to bring up, that, there are other chemical plants, other things that can go wrong. People, are trying to run and they won't be able to move, especially in congested areas. And that is a very good point.
Well, in airports, too. I mean, they have backup systems for the traffic control, and most likely everybody's going to get down out of the sky okay. But once they get down, they're not going to move.
Right.
And hopefully they're going to be able to get down out of the sky okay. I mean, when you've got a whole bunch of jets up in a holding pattern, you got 1,000 jets above your head, you got to find places to put all of them because they're going to want to come down right now.
So yeah, I mean.
And they, they cannot scramble the military quickly enough to deal with some of the immediate effects that are going to be happening. Like flooding. I mean, where was the military in Hurricane Sandy? They were there after the event. They weren't there during the event. I don't remember seeing them.
None of the agencies are ever helpful. They're always there after to, show up, take pictures, but they're never there really to help the people and to help the situation. And we saw it in Katrina, we saw it in Hurricane Sandy, and people went out without power. I mean, my brother-in-law lives on Long Island, and there were people, robbing houses and walking down the street. It was a complete and utter blackout. And you never see any of these agencies doing what they're supposed to be doing because they're not really there to do this.
Well, they're not. And I'll tell you one of the things that makes me glad to. If I was a contractor, I was not a full Fed. In the federal government now, real feds probably do most of the management tasks,
right.
or they subcontract out. But I would say 95% of the work that's done is done by contractors. And I was a permanent contractor. I wasn't a temporary or anything like that. And during my time there, I designed several courses. One, by the way, was on emergency planning for nuclear plant incidents. And there are 3 different zones. The EPZ is the emergency planning zone, and there are 3 different zones. And you don't know how many radiological incidents have occurred at any nuke near you. You won't know that. You only know about the ones that escape the plant boundaries. The rest, any incident that is not beyond the boundaries of the plant, you're never going to hear about that. I can tell you about things that have actually been caused by SCADA systems, or things that have been caused by electromagnetic interference that would curl your hair, but they were mitigated, taken care of before they ever got beyond the plant boundaries. But one of the attitudes that I picked up over the years I was there, one of the other courses I designed was for the on-scene coordinator. And this is usually a senior person in the federal government who is probably on tap to become very senior, probably on tap to go into some, very powerful post within whatever organization, DOE, DOD, DHS. But the on-scene coordinator is one of those kind of trial by fire things that these people have to go through to prove they can handle the deal. And the on-scene coordinator has to basically coordinate with the local, state, local, regional, and federal laws and organizations. And one attitude I consistently picked up in all the time I was there is that none of these federal agencies ever want to take the lead. And the only way the Department of Homeland Security ever became so prominent is that it was the only agency that was willing to take the lead. These other agencies want to go, oh, no, we're not the lead agency in this problem. Yes, we will contribute and we'll add our resources, but we are not responsible. We are not the lead federal agency. They don't want to run the emergency response. They turn tail and run the other direction. They don't want the liability. So usually if you see an emergency happening, a big emergency, behind the scenes there's a scuffle of everybody trying to run for the door. And the last one left in the game of musical chairs, the one without the chair, is the one that holds the bag and has to take the public exposure for handling that emergency. And more that's been the Department of Homeland Security, and they just, they're kind of like the trash company. It takes the company for granted until they get mad at you. You're not paying them enough. And then they start picking up the trash. Pretty soon they're going to get what they want. Well, that's exactly what's happened with the Department of Homeland Security. They're the ones that pick up the trash. They're the ones that take the responsibility. And it'll be really interesting to see how they handle the next incident in view of all their preparations. And by the way, they do feel, I don't know, are you aware of the fusion centers?
Yeah.
And the fusion centers, each state, there are 50 at least, but the fusion centers have to be located physically within 1 mile of the state's standing emergency response organization, the ERO. And they have to be within 1 mile. And they have the right, the legal right, to send. Okay, what the Fusion Center does is it collects information from all kinds of sources. And, the Fusion Centers have been the primary source for all this NSA scandal that we have going on. It's not just phone companies. The Fusion Centers look at your magazine subscriptions. They look at your credit card purchases. They look at your club memberships. They look at your vehicle OnStar records. They can look at your repair records. They look at your health care. They assemble all these things into patterns. So they're, quote-unquote, looking for anomalies. And they're looking for terrorism, supposedly. That's supposedly their charter. But do you know that if there's what's happening? Oh, and by the way, let's say a truck carrying radiological material runs off a highway, gets run off the road, or has a big blowout, pulled off onto an exit ramp, and one of the containers shifts. It's very, very unlikely, by the way, that any of those containers would ever rupture. They're bomb-proof. But let's say one of those containers shifts, and all of a sudden there has to be a radiological assistance program response. That area of that highway where that mishap occurred is no longer under sovereign control of the city or the state or the region. It's now the Department of Energy. Sovereign control under the Department of Energy. And anybody, you can't just come and go. Responders cannot just come and go. Anytime there's a nuclear incident or question, threat, the area that is in question becomes the property of the United States government. That's something that, one of those little facts that people don't know.
No, I didn't realize.
Anyway, so those fusion centers are gathering all kinds of information, and that goes out to, the Joint Terrorism Task Force and places like that. And those fusion centers have the legal right now, to send investigators to an incident scene, and they literally can stop an emergency response if they think a crime might have been committed, and if they think there's evidence to be preserved. This is something that's rankled me for a long time, and I'm really out on a limb by saying it. But let's say that there were some nuclear materials got out of control. Like, all the national laboratories produce nuclear substances for medical imaging. Like if you have to drink some technetium and an MRI, that kind of thing. Well, those are under the control of the national labs, and they are produced by the national labs, and they're distributed and monitored and regulated by the Department of Energy. And one of the places where radiological materials get out of control sometimes is in the well drilling industry. They use radioactive probes. But let's say that there's been a theft of some radiological isotopes from a medical supply van. Well, let's say that they had an accident and there's a spill or whatever. Okay, so you got the guys in suits out there, and they're trying to mitigate the situation. They're trying to cordon it off, and if there's an airborne plume, they're trying to map the plume, and they're going to predict where that airborne material is going so they can evacuate people in advance. And they're trying to come up with a way to quickly sequester the material. In the middle of that response, the fusion center can send somebody over to suit up and stop the response so they can preserve evidence. They can literally make people back off and stop trying to fix the situation because they want to preserve criminal evidence. So that comes back into this whole question about cyber terrorism. What are they going to do when they might have criminal evidence? How preoccupied are they going to be with responding to the desperate situations that get created if they're worried about tracking down the criminals first and worrying about the needs of the people second? Yeah,
I mean, they're not going to worry about the needs of the people. They're just going to, leave them aside and
they're going to go for it. They're going to go try to find the perps.
Right.
And unfortunately, I don't trust things anymore. After all the stuff I've seen, and I do a lot of, one of my hobbies is quantum physics. I just happen to like it, and I do a lot. I've had years and years of technical experience and working with electromagnetics, and that's on the science, not just a training design field, and so I'm very interested in that, and I track what the sun's doing, and I track some of the stuff that we're doing overseas militarily. Like we just took our X-band radar over to the Sea of Japan.
Right. Yeah.
Things like that. I keep track of stuff like that, and by the way, that EMP article I sent you, the research paper from all those folks from Los Alamos National Labs and Sandia National Labs were the main participants in putting together that survey of what happened under an EMP for George Bush. And inside of that, let me see if I can tell you what page it is. It's called the Pembroke Refinery Incident. Chapter 1, page 8, under infrastructure commonalities. Anyway, they describe this thing. Can I read you 2 paragraphs?
Sure. Go ahead.
They're really short.
Okay.
On July 4th, 1994, a severe thunderstorm passed over the Pembroke refinery in the United Kingdom. Lightning strikes resulted in a 0.4-second power loss, only 0.4 seconds, and subsequent power dips throughout the refinery. Consequently, numerous pumps and overhead fin fan coolers tripped repeatedly, resulting in the main crude column pressure safety valves lifting and major upsets in the process units and other refinery units, including those within the fluid catalytic cracking complex. There was an explosion in the FCC unit, and a number of isolated fires continued to burn at locations within the FCC, butamer, and alkylation units. The explosion was caused by flammable hydrocarbon liquid continuously being pumped into a process vessel that, because of a valve malfunction, had its outlet closed. The control valve was actually shut when the system indicated it was open. The malfunctioning process control system did not allow the refinery operators to contain the situation. As a result of this incident, an estimated 10% of the total refining capacity in the UK was lost until this complex returned to service. The business loss was estimated at $70 million and 4.5 months of downtime.
Wow.
And that was from a lightning storm. And so you can really think of this cyber grid takedown as a really nasty big solar flare or a lightning storm or an atomic bomb blast. It's going to have the same effects.
Right. So, I mean, no matter how we look at it and how it actually occurs, it's really the same type of thing, except for the EMP is really
the results are going to be.
Excuse me?
Go ahead.
Now, I'm saying the EMP takes it a step further where it's actually blowing out all the electronics and they're just not usable at this point compared to...
Either not usable or giving false data, which means they can do more harm.
Right.
You know, that's where the harm comes from, I think, is in a walking wounded system that thinks that the tank is empty when the tank is full. That kind of thing. Yeah. And look at New Jersey. Look at all the refineries. I mean, South Philadelphia, between Philadelphia and the Chesapeake Bay, it's hundreds of square miles of refineries in Dow County. Who knows what's being made?
Yeah.
Possibilities are endless.
Ginny,
and then go ahead. We have a delay, I think.
I just want to, this is going quite long, and I'm going to have you back. And it was very nice for you to come on to X22 Report, and I really want to thank you for all the information that you've given. And I will have to have you back on to continue with more discussion on the power outage, EMP, cyber attack, and everything that you know. And I just wanted to say thank you very much for you taking the time and talking to everyone.
Well, thank you very much, Dave, for giving me a chance to do this. It's been on my mind a long time.